Hello, my name is Chris Snipes, and you are listening to The Melt. There is a timeline of the history of the multiverse that places us at a very small scale in comparison to the largest of pictures. This should not be used to justify our perceived insignificance, but to remind us that there are many moving parts on many different dimensions, and that they are all important. Many folks don't use their leisure time to really dig into the larger questions of existence. We agree to confine ourselves and limit our perceptions of ourselves and the multiverse to what our machines and instruments can measure and record. But when one realizes that one's mind and imagination play a very monumental part in what we perceive to be objective reality, and that this is the very core of where the lasting work happens, we realize how our machines and instruments fall short of even beginning to take us beyond the veil of matter far enough to give us some much-needed perspective on just how finite of a sliver our three-dimensional manifestation of ourselves is. It amounts to a sort of virtual reality haptic suit that our higher selves are wearing to be able to navigate a world of wood and wire. From this perspective, the history of the human being is cast in a completely different context. But how easy it has been for a few to redirect important historical narratives to count on the cultural turnover of generations to make it easy for such a social engineering to take place. Once someone gets labeled a heretic, unorthodox, unconventional, eccentric, a right-wing extremist, a left-wing extremist, a bohemian, a communist, a socialist, or a conspiracy theorist, they are, by default, instantly removed from the social dialogue. Even today, although subjects such as the possibility of many different narratives and the tangibility of interconnectedness are more openly accepted, there is still an abundance of finger-pointing and identity clinging going on. So let's do our best to cultivate an open mind. And I mean a genuinely open mind, far away from one's comfort zones and habitual ego-stroking. Today's guest, Dan Willis, has such an open mind. He was one of the Disclosure Project's top-secret military witnesses that testified at the National Press Club in D.C. in 2001, and has a very in-depth and ongoing historical timeline on his website that goes into all sorts of detail about the history of humanity, our contact with aliens, and how world bankers are not our friends. I begin the conversation by asking Dan how he got involved with the Disclosure Project.
Well, I'm one of over 500 witnesses that were collected by the year 2001. My actual, I was in the United States Navy with a high-level top-secret security clearance, working in communications at the busiest military communications hub on the planet back in 1969. And one of the communication outlets is through code, through Morse code. And so I was a high-speed code operator, and I took thousands of messages, top secret messages, but one always stuck through my head. One was a ship off the coast of Alaska that was reporting the crew visually witnessed off of Port Bowie, brightly glowing reddish-orange disk that was coming out of the ocean. It shot straight up into space. The radar operator on the ship tracked it going over 7,000 miles per hour. This was secret classified priority level going to the Chief of Naval Operations in Washington, D.C. This was an authenticated U.S. military communication, and when I was a kid, I used to love science fiction, and stuff. And, this sort of seeded my my interest. So what happened was after several presidential administrations, CIA directors, heads of intelligence, ever since going back to the Eisenhower administration, were being denied access to rogue illegal operations operating, which culminated back in 1997 when Dr. Stephen Greer with astronaut Edgar Mitchell, along with Commander Will Miller, met with the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff of Intelligence, Vice Admiral Thomas Wilson, provided him a national reconnaissance office secure document that actually originated out of Area 51 due to an event that happened there outside the base, which I actually was involved in the one that followed up from that meeting for the first time with Bob Lazar and recording 2 hours of interaction with him. What happened was Vice Admiral Thomas Wilson tried to look into it, and he was denied access. And him, with his constitutional authority, if anybody would be allowed access, and he was quite pissed. And so he told Dr. Greer, if you can gather your people together and willing to testify under oath and go on the record, you have my permission to go to the mainstream media with this. This group is illegal, quote unquote. And this goes all the way back to what's happened is ever since President Eisenhower lost control to the infiltrated corporations of the Fourth Reich of Germany. What happened was, as Brigadier General Stephen Lumpkin testified, who was on his staff, that he had lost control to the corporations, everybody remembers this famous farewell address,
Yes.
Beware of the misplaced powers of the industrial military complex. This is what he was trying to infer. What happened ever since that point forward, he was denied access. He threatened to invade Area 51 to try to get some information. Kennedy, was an assassination directive set up by Allen Dulles that 10 days after Kennedy tried to look into the extraterrestrial issue and released the files, he was assassinated. You have President Carter, who made it a campaign promise, since he had a UFO experience and actually filed a report. He promised the public that he would release the files. He was denied access by George H.W. Bush, the CIA director. Then you have, in around 1993, you have President Bill Clinton, who was trying to gain access to this information. This was all steered up because of Lawrence Rockefeller wanted to have this initiative to release the information. So he had his CIA director, James Woolsey, try to look into it. So he was denied access. And so he brought a civilian in, Dr. Stephen Greer, back in 93, who brought a huge stack of documents, photographs, and substantiating this in a 3-hour meeting that he had with the CIA director. And the director said, I know the subject's real. I'm trying to figure out why the hell I can't gain access to it. And so it was from that point he met with military advisors, and they started collecting not just 10 or 12 or 20, but hundreds of military and intelligence witnesses and some corporate contractors. And so what happened in 2001 at the National Press Club, the largest event in the history of the National Press Club, one of the witnesses actually chickened out, and so I acted as a fill-in for the witness. And here we had 22 cameras of all the mainstream media in the back row. 20 of us out of the 500 were willing to break national security oaths, willing to state it in front of the cameras, each of us after we gave our testimony, that we're willing to testify under oath, that's penalty of perjury, to our testimony. And my testimony was a small fragment that complemented what the other witnesses were disclosing, which were that, Carl Wolf's talking about the bases that were on the far side of the moon that was clearly visually witnessed, that 57 different species, like Clifford Stone, had been categorized by 1989. And that Donna Hare testified that she worked for NASA for 20 years, and she said, I don't know how they do it, how some people know what's going on, other people have been there for years. I have no idea that, they airbrush the UFOs out, that the astronauts are told to keep secret what actually happened when we went to the moon back in 1969. That the nukes were being shut down, that we had the scientists, this is an important one, we have the scientists that are willing to go before an open congressional hearing to prove that we have 0-point energy. We've had it for decades, clean, non-polluting energy. Mark McCandish talked about an exhibit at Norton Air Force Base back in 1988 that had 3 visible flying saucers that were hovering off the ground. One is a 25-foot, 50-foot, 120-foot one that were actually the antiques that were built back in the 50s that could go faster than the speed of light. So you can imagine, as Ben Rich said back in, I think it was 1993 or so, that anything you can imagine, we already know how to do. So from research back, Nazi Germany had anti-gravity developed by 1934. We were 20 years behind. We didn't develop it until about October of 1954. This is how the Nazi SS was able to intimidate both the Truman and Eisenhower administrations. That's what happened with Admiral Byrd, Operation High Jump. They were defeated because they had developed the advanced, anti-gravity discs along with directed energy weapons, and, wiped out his, all their aircraft and everything that went down there to Antarctica. So what happened was, being an ex-ABC newsman myself, here I'm looking at all these witnesses and what they're disclosing, and talking about presidents, CIA directors, and everybody being denied access. And here you have 22 cameras of all the mainstream media. I thought, oh my God, we're disclosing all this information. This is going to be like a world. I'm involved in this world-changing event. How could anything be different after that?
Sure.
Then I realized that CNN basically came back with a little minute and a half. It was a 2-hour long conference, everybody giving their testimonies. I remember Carl Wolf saying, talking about the bases on the other side of the moon, saying, here it is, 30 years ago today. And I hope to hear it on the evening news, but it never got on the evening news. What happened was CNN came out with, is there life on other planets? Some people think they have proof there is. Elaine Tihanna explains, and they go on making it sound as though, we wanted to have a congressional hearing on simply the reality of UFOs. And this was 4 months before the 9/11 event happened. This was back on May 9th, 2001. 9/11 happened, everything went off the radar.
Of course.
So, I saw what CNN did with it. And so CBS wanted to do a special interview with me. And they flew down from Los Angeles with a special team, and I told them, I'm not willing to do this interview unless I can make a short statement that we have the scientists within these unacknowledged special access programs that are willing to come forth in an open, secrecy-free congressional hearing and put it on the table and prove that we have 0-point energy to end the energy and environmental crisis. I just wanted that little statement, and they interviewed me for 45 minutes. the producer afterward, she said, I know I promised, but I never had this happen before. The higher executives, read CIA, made me cut that part out. So you
Jesus.
have to think, our mainstream media, if their agenda is one that is in the interest of humanity, to block the information that we have a solution that could help the entire world, you have to think twice about what their intention and their agenda is.
Exactly. So, why do you think that happened? Do you think that they didn't want that to come out because it would make them look like the horrible people that they were for hiding that and being able to steer the environmental situation in the on Earth in a completely positive direction, or do you think that there was some other agenda behind that?
Well, Chris, when I experienced that, I was like, I was just dumbfounded. All this effort, all these witnesses coming forth. I traveled across the country in all the major cities with Dr. Greer, in San Diego, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Portland, Boulder, Colorado, all over the place. And we rented these huge halls, and we had the executive briefing that we shared in the Pentagon. And, after doing that and seeing one situation after another, in San Diego they had dancing alien dolls with smoke. In San Francisco they said,
Jesus.
oh, make fun of it. Oh, the Disclosure Project's looking to aliens to solve the world's energy problems. And in Portland, they looked at each other afterward and they said, free energy, aliens. They all laugh. And let's get on with the big story. The bozos meet the bonkos in the playoffs and they go on to sports, right? The giggle factor, as they say. This some company out of Hollywood wanted me to write it. Being a witness and an ex-ABC newsman, wanted me to write an article on, to answer your question in a roundabout way. Wanted me to write an article on media control in regards to the UFO issue, and I gladly took that on. And I felt like, I knew a lot of these witness testimonies. I got to know a lot of the witnesses. I became aware of a lot of the official documentation. And so I had a lot as a solid rock foundation of people who were very credible with documents that have been authenticated. So there's obviously something there, including my own, experience. And so I started to put together this article, and I titled it, Who Controls the Agreed Upon Reality Through the Mainstream Media, and Why They Fear Disclosing the Truth About the Extraterrestrial Reality. And so I figured the only way to really try to understand the history, obviously we didn't get taught this in school, did we? I had to go from the year 1900 to present day and start plugging in these different events that have happened, different documents, different witness testimonies. And after a while, it started to paint a picture that forms the agenda of why, to answer your question, why they, what it appears, this is my opinion, is that when the Nazis infiltrated, they couldn't beat the industrial might of the United States. We could build, 10 or 20 tanks and planes for every one that they could build. The Nazis were working with technological superiority. And as you research back, I found out, before the end of the war, they had this plan. They called it Weltanschauungskrieg, which means worldview warfare. They planned to infiltrate into the United States and create what's called a matrix of perception that would hide the infiltration and hide the fact that that they've technologically hijacked the planet. And and they did this with Operation Mockingbird with Alan Dulles back in 1950, which controlled all the mainstream media outlets. And this is nothing new. Back in, it was like 1917. It was Rockefeller, J.P. Morgan, and Warburg who contributed to the Federal Reserve, actually took control of all the major newspapers way back then. So this is an old game of controlling the media in order to control the masses for the agenda of an elite banking few. Which you have to think about, the elite bankers that actually funded and brought the Nazis into power. And so, they started the Invention Secrecy Act in 1951, which I became quite involved with the technology aspect after we were denied a congressional hearing. I don't mean to go off. There's so much information on all this. It's easy to go off on tangents, but I spent 10 years meeting with scientists and inventors around the planet, many of which were suicided or murdered or received what's called the National Security Order, which means your invention has been deemed to be a detriment to the national security of the United States. You cannot share it with anyone. And so thousands of these, this is out of a U.S. Patent Office, a secret system called the Sensitive Application Warning System. Anybody who's got anti-gravity, has anything that's free energy, anything that produces, and in other words, anything that's a game changer for the whole planet, they automatically get one of these national security orders. And so in answering your question in a roundabout way, it seems the Nazis that moved down to Antarctica, they basically intimidated the Truman and Eisenhower administrations. They set up an agreement where they started getting the manpower, personnel, and things being shipped down. It was Operation Deep Freeze right around 1956 that started to assist them. And so the corporations have been working with them, and also, we know that back in the 1980s, we had like 50 corporations that for all our different media outlets. Today, we only have 6. And it seems that they want to keep us technologically so retarded so that we're continue to use, oil, nuclear, and coal, which are these dangerous, obsolete technologies, when we've had the solution. So long as we do not have a technological advancement, we're not a threat. But what happened was the Navy was able to develop this technology with an assistance with the extraterrestrial race, just as the Nazis were able to, as Wernher von Braun, his mentor, Professor Hermann Oberth, said, when they asked him, how did Nazi Germany attain such advancement in technology? And he said that, we had help from people from other worlds. So the Nazis were able to achieve that advancement technologically with the assistance of the extraterrestrial race, but a more benevolent race working with the U.S. Navy. And all this happened back in this started back in the Battle of L.A. back in 1942, where there was the anti-aircraft guns were going off like crazy. You remember that? And 2 ET drone craft were shot down. One of them, this was 1942. One of them was taken to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and the other one was taken to China Lake Naval Weapons Station. And they both were working on reverse engineering. But what happened was General, what was his name? I always forget his name. Anyway, he was with the Air Force, and there was a Project Rand that was controlling all of this. And what happened was it forced the Navy out to do its own program in secrecy, and the Air Force basically took over the operation. Unfortunately, James Forrestal, one of the MJ-12 members, wanted to have this disclosed, but the other members of the MJ-12, they basically, assassinated him, and John F. Kennedy was on Forrestal's staff, who was very aware of this, and his background in Office of Naval Intelligence. He was briefed on a lot of this. So, what the reason why is, if we are still using jet fuel, we're using rockets, which we haven't needed since 1954, which is the whole NASA thing, and Elon Musk with the SpaceX and everything. It's just expensive props. We haven't needed that type of propulsion system. And the Navy has been releasing recently anti-gravity patents, fusion reactor patents, force field reactant patents, these extremely advanced patents that are not just theoretical, they're operational and in application. And when we gave our testimony way back, that was almost 20 years ago. It's hard to believe. When we gave our testimonies back in 2001, it inspired a hacker in the UK, Gary McKinnon, who they threatened him with 70 years in prison, for what he did. He got into the Space Command, and he saw the Solar Warden program, the non-terrestrial officers. He was able to get an image of a huge cigar, kilometers-long battle cruiser that the U.S. Navy has, and USS Lee May and the Hillenkotter, who was named after the first CIA director, MJ-12 member, who warned about the dangers of secrecy, surrounding the UFO issue and how this secrecy could be used against us. And he was right. It was.
Crazy. So do you, back to the, when you testified for the National Press Club, do you think that because the lack of coverage and the fact that 9/11 was basically just 4 months afterwards, nothing really, no change really occurred from that? It wasn't really a disclosure at all, was it?
Well, with the control of the mainstream media, you have to realize that the Nazis had that as part of their plan. The Nazi SS set up the Bilderberg meetings back in February 1954 by Prince Bernhard, former Nazi SS officer. Every year since that day, they have these meetings when they bring in the high executives of the media corporations, the big movers and shakers of the world of finance and everything, that everybody sits down and they get briefed on this year's agenda, right? And so basically they get their talking points. So the 6 corporations that at the highest level are intelligence operatives that are working together with billions of dollars going into think tanks that are engineering our consent and our perceptions that we see on the evening news. It's very troubling when you watch the evening news because you can see what they're doing with the public. As far as I'm concerned, from all my research, each of us in the military, we each give a sworn oath to protect the Constitution of the United States against enemies, foreign and domestic. And from all indications, we have an infiltration of a domestic enemy operating. I served in Vietnam in combat action, and the radio men, which I was, are usually the first to die, because what the enemy does is takes out the communications first. And so you have a handful of corporations controlling dozens and dozens and dozens of, and a lot of people have seen this, where you see all of the talking heads all saying the same exact line. I remember one where it was a saying, it was one special one where they did, CBS, ABC, NBC, all the different networks, and each one was saying the exact same line, and was saying
Yes.
the Easter Bunny has um, economic sanctions this year, has taken some spring out of the Easter Bunny's step this year.
Yes.
And every single one is saying the same thing. And there's plenty of examples of that. So what they do is they all get the talking points, and and some are trained by the CIA, for like Anderson Cooper, even Generoso Pope, who was back in the 50s, National Enquirer, the new, what was it, the World News Network, or whatever it is. How clever to put discrediting alien stories in front of the grocery checkout line, where you have these weird, very concocted alien stories, just to put discrediting information out into the public so they don't really question it. So, this situation with the media is what, on my testimony, I've seen on YouTube my testimony in a couple of different languages. So it went on the internet, but on the mainstream media outlets, it got little 1 minute clip here and there, that no, people are not aware of the world disclosure event that attempted to happen back on May 9th, 2001, Chris.
Is there any place on the internet that you can watch the whole thing in its entirety?
Yes. In fact, I made you can see the whole 2 hours if you go to thewebmatrix.net. It's in a chronological order. And so go to 2001, and you can see there's a link there to the 2 hour video. Now, I know people don't have the time to sit for 2 hours, so I took the most explosive testimonies and got it down to just over a half hour. Made a condensed version, so that's right next to it. They can see that as well.
So both versions are up.
Yes, both versions are
Fantastic.
there.
Cool. That's very kind of you to do that. I would be the kind of person that would want to sit through the whole 2 hours, but I don't expect everyone is like that. But that's great that you have it up. That's fantastic. So then there was a disclosure event that happened. What was that, in 2018? Where the New York Times came out with admitting that the government said that there were
Oh,
files
November
on
of 2017.
2017.
Now this is an interesting thing, with this whole situation that happened. Now you can tell when they give the green light to all the myriad of media outlets to go with the story, right? They definitely put the blank on with the disclosure event in 2001. But when the Advanced Aerial Threat Phenomena or program that happened out of the Pentagon, which was, they were talking about the 2004 Nimitz incident, where the Navy pilot was talking about what he described as being a tic tac that was doing these insane right angle turns and technology that we're not aware of. The New York Times came out with it first. Now, New York Times is one of the deeply embedded core, elements of all this, along with, CNN, Washington Post, so forth. So they came out with it. New York Times comes out with it. Everybody follows, and so it got saturated for about 3 days. I was monitoring on all the media outlets. Even your grandmother knows about the the incident that happened back in. We're talking about incident back in 2004. And what's interesting is this triggered now to the Stars Academy, which is connected with Tom DeLonge,
Yes.
and people with the CIA and Lockheed and so forth like that. and Senator Harry Reid and Robert Bigelow and this whole group who's been talking about, oh, we need money to do this advanced research, which is, they've done the research decades ago. So all of a sudden they came out with this whole series on the History Channel called Unidentified, and the language that they use continuously is the alien threat. That use this word threat a lot. Now, recently, a U.S. Air Force special operative came forth to reveal that Tic Tac was not extraterrestrial. It was part of the U.S. Air Force's secret space program, that they were actually working with the Navy. I'm sure a lot of sailors were freaked, and that on the lower level ranks, they weren't aware of it, but high command was aware of what was going on. They were testing out the Navy's most advanced radar, working with that. And so, but the To the Stars Academy and the Advanced Aerial Threat Program of the Pentagon were all pushing this as a extraterrestrial threat. Now, there's a movement toward creating a limited hangout, you could say. This is an intelligence term. A limited hangout means you hang out the information that kind of gives you a pass that, okay, you covered the event, but you hang out a very limited part. And what they did was they hanged out the part about the potential reality of extraterrestrials, but they cut out everything having to do about our government being infiltrated, that we have these advanced technologies and so forth and so on. All that was perfectly sanitized out. This is what this is what they do, and so you have to question the agendas behind this. And some of the agendas have been revealed going all the way back. It was like 1967, about the same time the CIA dispatch came out to tell all its agents to call anyone that was questioning the JFK assassination as a conspiracy theorist. That's where it originated, the term. And they were actually lying to their own agents, saying that Lee Harvey Oswald was, it's a false claims that he was connected with the CIA, whereas John McCone, the CIA director that replaced the fired Alan Dulles, came out with a memorandum and said, yeah, under the cover of Office of Naval Intelligence, Lee Harvey Oswald was trained by the CIA. So they were lying to their own agents. And so back in 1967, there was a report from Iron Mountain which talked about contriving a threat from outer space. It even talked about, LBJ hit the roof when he found out this got leaked, this whole report, and had it suppressed for all time. But in the report, it was pretty sick. They're talking about destroying the environment, doing all these things in order to, create this one world government. And Werner von Braun, on his deathbed, revealed that they had, false flag plans in the future, starting, with the Soviets, which was false flag, because they brought, 3,000 Nazi spies into the CIA. Alan Dulles working with General Reinhard Gehlen, head of Nazi intelligence. They were giving false estimates to the Truman administration and brought in trillions of dollars that was funneled into the clandestine, CIA operations. And even as early as the 2016 election, a leaked document of the Benson Strategy Group, they had different scenarios that they were looking at to try to get voters to not vote, because, the Bilderberg meeting had approved Hillary for the presidential position. And so they wanted people not to turn out, and they had different things. They had a plague, they had riots, they had the one that got the most, at 38%, was an extraterrestrial invasion. Now, they
Wow.
have the technology to pull it off. So there's three different documents that, or three different indicators that they had for a long time. But I think, and we exposed that too during the National Press Club in 2001 to the public. So, a lot of people are aware of the hoax alien invasion scenario. So I think that the beans got spilled on that. So I don't think they're going to try to pull that off. But where was I going with all that?
It all leads back to the same place. They're like
It
tentacles
does.
leading back to the same octopus. Well, you mentioned earlier about the early bankers controlling the media back in the early 1900s. And you even mentioned on your website, and I've heard at other places too, that going way, way back, humankind had been enslaved, just to put all of this in a bigger picture, by a race or a group of beings called the Anunnaki in order to mine gold. And I'm not sure, I've heard different stories as to what reason they wanted that gold. But in a sense, that kind of started this dynamic that humans seem to have with money and materialism. And it just seems like it's sort of the same power play that's still a very strong element to manipulate humans by. So in one sense, it doesn't seem like much has changed, except now we have the media who also manipulates us to think in a particular way and to sort of delegate experts to tell us what is on the menu and what isn't, as far as what reality is, and what we're allowed to think, and what is crazy and what is not crazy. So in a sense, I mean, this banking stuff goes a long, long ways back. And
No,
then,
yeah, I'm in agreement with what you're saying, Chris. Mayor Rothschild said, give me control of a country's money, and I care not who makes the laws. And that is the fundamental principle. If you have where you can buy people off, or put people in positions that are, funded to do your dirty deeds,
sure.
our world can be compromised. Absolutely.
Yeah, and people are doing it all the time. I mean, it's now, I mean, it was one thing when our money system was, had gold backing it, but now it's so abstract, and now it seems like we're being pushed to even just get rid of cash altogether, that more than ever, it's like being a slave to a concept. It's not even it's something that we all mutually agree is important. And so then we do all kinds of crazy shit for it.
You have
Infighting.
to, yeah, you have to wonder about, the galaxy, and other galaxies are filled with civilizations, and you can imagine some of them have figured out how to, so we have such short lifespans. We only live 80, 90 years old or so on the average. And other civilizations can live hundreds and thousands of years old, and they most likely don't have a money system, where everything that they need is basically taken care of. I would like to see that for this earth. It's like, it's sad that, as a child, you grow up and you watch, science fiction, and it turns out that, I used to love, as a kid, I used to love, well, Outer Limits and Star Trek, and
Yes.
all this, and I find out that all that was coordinated through the Office of Naval Intelligence, through Leslie Stevens Jr., who was his father was Admiral Leslie Stevens, who was a contemporary of Admiral Rick Oboda, who was working with 29 Navy spies embedded in Nazi Germany, trying to catch up with the Draco reptilian technology that they had, bringing these reports back to Naval Air Station San Diego, where my father worked, and so anyway, Admiral Stevens was in Office Naval Intelligence, like his son, and basically they were putting out this information, the seed, the public. In fact, who was on the set with Leslie Stevens was Gene Roddenberry, who he gave the script to for Star Trek. And so, all this was seeding. They're trying to get us to catch up. Well, we live in this kind of like a Truman Show, this artificial reality that believes we need rockets to go overcome gravitational pull, and that we need gasoline for our vehicles, and we need these dangerous, highly dangerous nuclear power plants that the ETs have been trying to warn us about for some time, and the air polluting coal plants, and this dangerous, stupid, obsolete technologies that we've been forced down our throat because of the Invention Secrecy Act going back in 1951 that I mentioned earlier, that, after the congressional hearing was denied by the Bush administration that we were seeking after the 2001 event, I volunteered because I worked with the Navy and all their electronics, and I have a really good technical background. And so we had a database of about 300 scientists and inventors around the planet that had what's called over unity technology, where you have way more power coming out than you have going in. And so for 10 years, Chris, I flew around the planet with part of a corporation we set up with Professor Loiter and Dr. Stephen Greer, and I met with these scientists. Just one horror story after another. I'll tell you one. Down in the Dominican Republic, we had this one inventor that had a device that was producing over 500 watts with less than 1 watt going in. I flew down there, and it turns out the day before we got there, 2 CIA agents identified themselves as to the inventor. He says, if this works, you're dead. And so when I got there, it was all taken apart.
Jesus.
And we had members of our team, Dr. Eugene Maloff, somebody busted into his house and bludgeoned him to death. Another inventor, incredible mind, written a 5-volume series on the advanced calculus of dynamics of electron flow. He was able to, my wife Rebecca and I, we flew to Virginia and stayed there months. I set up a laboratory to meet with these scientists, to vet these energy, and he was able to substantiate and prove it to me. He had a little box about the size of a shoebox that was producing not a whole lot of power, about 140 watts. He was found slumped over dead in the parking lot in the airport on the way going to create a patent in Europe. Another incredible scientist that I know, he had a little device producing real inexpensive, and it was putting about 300 watts, and he had 60 or 70,000 of these made in Japan. He was given a national security order. His cars were blown up. He was thrown into prison. I'm still in contact with him. He has since developed another new energy device that can be brought up to megawatts. He hasn't gotten the national security oath on this one yet. An interesting side story about this that I got to share with you.
Please do.
Is that back in the early 70s, he was going through the Navy scrapyard and was able to get one of the generators off the USS Eldridge. That sounds familiar.
Yeah.
That was the Philadelphia experiment.
Yes.
Back in 1943. He was able to get one of these generators, a massive thing, and it was made by the Tesla company. And it was pretty banged up, you can imagine. And so it took him years to try to get this thing operational again. At one point, it became operational, and he was in the other room. His secretary was in the room where a dimensional portal opened up, and a creature came through. And she had the sense of mind to grab her Brownie Instamatic camera and take a photo of it. And you can see it
Ooh.
if you go to thewebmatrix.net and go to the 1943 timeline of the Philadelphia experiment. You can see a picture of this being. And what he was able to do was do experiments with this device that was actually able to, people who understand that the reality that we live in is basically oscillatory, and that there's huge, they say particles, there's huge spaces in between, just like there's distances in the, it's all fractal, going all the way through the universe down to the atomic structure. It's a fractal relationship that goes into infinity. And he did an experiment taking a 2-inch cutting board that was, hard wood, and he put that between the cages that he had food on the other side, and had a rat that actually, when this device was turned on, it expanded the molecular structure of the wood so that the rat could actually walk right through the solid wood and get the mice. Now, after he analyzed the rat, he found that there was, in the DNA, there was wood particles, mixed in with that. So, but
Wow.
he's developed that. But anyway, that kind of substantiates that what happened in 1943 at the Philadelphia experiment with those poor sailors has some basis to it.
Wow.
So, after 10 years, I basically gave up. I live off the grid in the mountains with my wife.
Nice.
But it's so tightly controlled that anybody who tries to get a solution other than nuclear, oil, or coal out to the world, they'll shut you down one way or another.
Well, that is a reason to suppress free energy right then and there, because that is free. I mean, that's got to be a word that scares the hell out of them from the get-go. People would have autonomous energy sources. They wouldn't need to go through a conduit of pay gate, or be at the mercy of a corporation to get their energy.
Yeah, just imagine this: if they release the technologies. Now, there's transitional technologies. I worked with the Bedini brothers for many years. They both died mysteriously on the same day. We also worked with the group that had all the technology from Stan Meyer. Now, Stan Meyer was someone who was able to get patents on how to drive vehicles on water. Now, all that was shut down, of course, and he was poisoned. And so we were trying to get the equipment. Now, he was in the Navy. He was a radar specialist, and he found out, it's like the hydrogen molecule, separating it in H2O. If you hit it like with a certain frequency, it separates in a huge amounts, and you can drive a vehicle on just water, and you can get quite a range on a small amount of water.
Wow.
And the vehicle will actually last longer because it burns cleaner and there's no pollution. And of course, that wouldn't do the oil industry any good.
Of course.
But we put a bid in for that technology to try to bring that out, because we had a systematic approach that was going to work to try to bring most inventors think, oh, I'm going to be wealthy, I'm going to be rich, and I'm going to be famous, but it doesn't happen that way. And so we tried to put a bid in, but another group out of England outbid us. And all the members of that group have mysteriously died.
Wow.
Yeah. And so just imagine if we had this trend, we have billions of these infernal combustion engines, I call them. They basically just self-destruct. There's so many moving parts. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
You could retrofit all the vehicles on the planet with an easy modification that could allow them to run on water, We could retrofit the dangerous nuclear and coal plants with 0 point energy to get multiple, terawatts of power feeding all the people on the grid. But we really want to get off the grid, because if we ever get an EMP attack or a corona mass ejection from the sun, it's not like in the 1800s. All the transformers will burst into flames. Millions of people will die, because it's going to try to bring the grid back up for everybody. It will be, you can imagine, no power for everybody. You can imagine what a chaos that would be. So we need to harden the grid, for one thing, in case something like that happens. But even better yet, get rid of the ugly wires running all over the place. It's archaic technology. Every single home and business could have something the size of a shoebox that would give you, cut the wires out of your house or your business. Anyway, back to our visualization. I want everybody that's listening to visualize this, okay? Because visualization is powerful, because it creates a reality that can be brought into manifestation through the power of our creative mind.
Yes.
Science has shown that. So anyway, getting back to, every home and business can basically have one of these little units. As far as, the jets with the terrible things, with the air turbulence and all that, and the turbines, you get rid of all that. We have we have anti-gravity craft. You can go from LA to New York in a couple of minutes. They have developed the transversable wormhole technology, where it's like an IP address on the internet. You can go from one place to another. Just like in Star Trek, the teleporters. And the reason this keeps its secrecy so well is because it sounds so much like science fiction. It sounds so out of the norm that it keeps its own best secrecy. So people just think, oh, he's just a raving lunatic. He doesn't really know what, we don't have that kind of technology. We have, or else we would have it. We would have this technology. But there's a group that's been controlling it in order to keep us in this state of technological retardation, I call it. And the main culprit of this is our media communications, that the public doesn't know. That's why you only got a minute and a half on CNN and all the other networks not talking about anything about the technology and about the extraterrestrial presence and about the illegal operations that are going on, according to Vice Admiral Thomas Wilson, and that our presidents, CIA directors, heads of intelligence have all been denied access by these corporate-run programs that are reverse engineering technology. As the leaked transcript of Vice Admiral Thomas Wilson was meeting in 2002 with astrophysicist Eric Davis, who's written a number of Defense Intelligence Agency documents on warp drives and wormholes and things like that. And he was vehemently pissed. He was threatened that if he went drop this matter, that he would lose rank and see an early retirement, and that this group run by the corporations basically denied him access, and that they were working on extraterrestrial technology. And I've interviewed other witnesses that are, I call them the 21st century. I've studied a lot of the 20th century witnesses that have come forward. Now, starting in the year 2000, curiously enough, now the Navy had their program back in 1980. So 20 years later, all of a sudden, these people are having total memory recall because they have technologies that, and this took me a while to wrap my head around too, is that they can actually recruit somebody for a 20-year tour of duty on another timeline and bring them back. But what happens is after 20 years in this timeline lapses, they start to have a total memory recall. And I've talked to a number of these people. And
This is part of the secret space program, right?
right, the secret space program. And this is done with the U.S. Navy, and some of the people that are in the Air Force, like Emery Smith. I've interviewed him a number of times on the radio, and he's talking about under Kirkland Air Force Base, 168 levels deep underground military bases, but they're actually corporate. They're run by the corporations. The military just guards them, and he's working alongside extraterrestrials down there. So they have group ET military corporate operations going on, and so it made me think that my report going way back to 1969, when I received a report I found out naval intelligence is seeing these reports of flying discs coming in and out of our water. I found out that there's thousands of reports of flying saucers coming in and out of our waters. Now, what a perfect place to hide where there's nobody around. And, because of JANUP 146, all the sailors are you're under the Espionage Act. You go 10 years in prison if you say anything, right? But the Navy's just, in the last year or so, they've lightened up on that and changed their protocols, allowing sailors to report these things. And so, you have to wonder, there's probably, with all the deep underground military bases that a lot of people are aware of, there's hundreds of them connected with maglev trains, there's also deep underwater bases as well. It was these deep underground military bases that actually started back in 1946 when they brought over, under Paperclip, Project Paperclip, the mastermind for Hitler's underground, where he had the slaves working from the Nazi concentration camps, building the technologies for the Nazis. They brought over his mastermind, which was Xavier Dorsch, over to the Manzano Mountains in New Mexico in 1946, and they started tunneling out. And now, there's hundreds and thousands across the planet of these deep, massive underground bases that are connected with these trains that can go, Mach speeds, between them.
Well, so you said how many alien races were our government in contact with?
Well, Clifford Stone was part of a NBC team, nuclear biological chemical team, that would go in and on a retrieval case. They happen rare, but when they happen, I remember we were meeting with people at the Pentagon, and he talked about one incident where he had an ET being that was on the craft, and the being said, telepathically, because Clifford had an ability that was able to communicate with them. And he said, I'm afraid. Here he is with all these military people stuck on this planet. You could feel the emotion, and these people, these generals and admirals that were sitting in this group that were listening to him. They all like got kind of almost teary-eyed, listening to the story. But anyway, when he went in there, he was provided a book that, when you have to patch these people up, some are silicone-based, some are carbon-based, so you have different medical procedures for each one. And so they had, pictures of the beings, and they had the different criteria for, medical situations. And at the time when he left service, which was in 1989, they had categorized 57 different extraterrestrial species interacting with Earth, and now you can imagine the numbers, gone up exponentially.
Absolutely. But all of those are extraterrestrial. None of them are, because I've heard of civilizations that have lived inside of the Earth for thousands of years, but these are all extraterrestrials.
Well, that's my understanding. That was Clifford's testimony that he gave, but that's a good question, to ask if any of them are from the inner Earth.
Yeah, yeah,
And you have to wonder about the inner Earth, the oceans of the inner Earth, intermingling with the oceans on the outer Earth, I guess you could say, if there's ways between those two, that the oceans where they can take their craft and fly out.
exactly.
Um, the report I got was off the coast of Alaska, which turns out there's a whole lot of activity up there. In fact, the Travel Channel did an interview with me on a series called The Alaskan Triangle, because all these people seeing flying saucers coming out of there. So there's apparently a base or something. Something's going on down deep in the ocean over there. That's for sure.
Yeah, there was a period of time, I want to say it was within the last couple of years, that a lot of different people were going to make a visit up there. There were all kinds of politicians, some celebrities. I can't think of any of them right now, but they were all going to the Antarctic to, for what? Who knows? But
Oh,
something,
yeah. John Kerry, right
yeah,
during the election
yes,
period. You have the head of the Russian church. You've got Buzz Aldrin, who did that
yes.
mysterious tweet, like, we're all in danger. It's evil itself. And they say, oh, no, he got hacked or something. And it showed a picture of this pyramid. And, they've got. They're finding out all kinds of things going on down there. It's the Navy SEALs, like Linda Moulton Howe's interviewing these witnesses. There's huge octagon structures with ancient hieroglyphs, and you go into the building, and it's like, this is down in Antarctica. It's like 68 degrees, and it's all lit up with no visible source of light. And these things are massive. The walls are like 18 feet thick, and it's all polished black basalt type material. And the hieroglyphs go in like a couple of inches. So it's some kind of technology that we don't have, that's for sure.
So, and there's a big Nazi Antarctica connection too, right? And Atlantis.
Oh, huge. Yeah, yeah. Well, the Nazis started their expeditions, back in what was it, like 1931 or 32, something like that. And then, because they basically found there's ways to, because of there's these huge canals that you can go down underneath the ice and come up. And there's these huge caverns that are, there's actually, Antarctica has the largest amount of volcanic activity on the planet. And
Wow.
so you've got these huge caverns under there. And so, yeah, they started a spaceport down there where they started building like an assembly line of their discs. And what William Tompkins, a very credible witness that had documentation to support his claim that he was, an information disseminator that was meeting with these Navy spies and Admiral Rick Oboda at the Naval Air Station, San Diego. And from there, he was taking the Admiral's plane and meeting with, Boeing, McDonnell Douglas, different corporations. We were desperately trying to figure out from these Navy spies. Of course, they had German heritage, to be able to slip in with the SS
Yeah,
to
yeah.
try to catch up with what the Nazis were doing.
Crazy. Have you just came up randomly in my mind? Have you ever seen the movie Iron Sky?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, it's funny, isn't it? How they truth and they make comedies, out of truth.
Out of disclosure.
Yeah, because the Nazis developed an actual swastika-shaped moon base. Well, you can imagine if they had anti-gravity in 1934, they had a moon base in 1942, and they have bases on Mars and elsewhere as well. Of course they would. If you had anti-gravity.
Sure. And of course, it's the movie is it's a comedy, for a science fiction comedy probably would be the best way to describe it. But it's kind of it's campy, it's tabloidy. It's not meant to be taken seriously on any level. Like, Wouldn't it be crazy if the Nazis were on the moon for 70 years and they're planning an attack on Earth? It's hilarious.
They slip it in through different things like Captain America Winter Soldier. Yeah, did you see
Yeah.
that one? You see
Yes.
they had a whole thing on the Nazis and how it's 90% on with a little bit here and there in Hollywood, but yeah, they're slipping it out there in different ways.
Hydra is kind of like the Nazi infiltration in the Marvel movies too. It's kind of interesting. Even in
Oh yeah.
the very first Captain America movie, there's actually they do interact with the Nazis, and one of the early Marvel foes is a German. So very interesting how this is kind of interwoven in comic book mythology, and it's really exposing an actuality or a version of actual events that took place.
Yeah, and the movie The Matrix is actually like what we're all living in now. And a lot of people, the analogy, it caught on, the red pill, blue pill analogy is so close to the reality that we are living in because of the uh, matrix of perception that the Nazis had. The Rockefeller Foundation completely rewrote the history. Education is one of the main ones back in 1946, right after the war. So it hid the Nazi escape, and as well as, there was like how many hundreds of U-boats and hundreds of thousands of Nazis, and all the scientists didn't come over in Paperclip that were missing, and all this stuff was all conveniently erased out of history, and we were given our you know our BS history that we get in high school and so forth. But through the control of the history, through the control of the education, through the control of the mainstream media, with the CIA operatives. With the CIA was, heavily infiltrated. Even the man who was pushed to create the CIA out of the OSS by Allen Dulles, of all people, who was infamous for the Nazi infiltration. He said, these people don't have to account to anybody. They get off doing their own thing. Um, and then we have Hollywood, ever since, Project Dove. The first movie was The Day the Earth Stood Still, which was kind of a positive take on extraterrestrial beings. But then you see all the evil alien movies, all the aliens wanting to come and kill us all and take over the planet, from that point on.
Well,
Uh, to
quickly
create,
for I'm sorry, go ahead.
oh, no, no, no. I'm just saying to create this matrix of perception.
For those who don't know, what is Operation Dove?
It was basically, when you look at the people, and if you go to the webmatrix.net and go to the 1951 timeline, it goes into the long detail of the associations of the people, the secret societies that are connected with this. And you'll find it interesting that so many presidents, intelligence directors, heads of different governments are all connected. 33rd degree Freemasons, Knights of Malta, Skull and Bones. They coordinate together. Also, there's one document that I have up on the site that had a 25-year secrecy order put on it by the CIA, called The Vatican, the Nazis, and the CIA. And it goes into how the Vatican got all the passports out of Malta for a lot of the Nazis to escape through the rat lines that went down to Argentina and Brazil and so forth. So there's all this interconnecting with the banking elite, the secret societies, and I hate to say it, but the Vatican's connected in there with the whole thing.
Of course it is, definitely.
And one of the documents I thought was interesting was a top secret majestic document of 1952. I can't believe it. I remember all these dates. That it was Cardinal Francis Spellman, who was the head cardinal for the United States. They were talking about how the Vatican wanted to have containment of this information, and that they had actually drawn up a war plan if mass sightings ever occur. And this is an official authenticated document. And so the Vatican's working with the going way back. I think it was either Truman or Eisenhower. No, it had to be Eisenhower, I think. Back then, where they had this war plan called 4P, that if mass sightings ever occur. So the Vatican's been, and you look at the concordant that the Nazis did with the Vatican, and the cardinals all doing the Nazi salute, and there's a lot of interconnections with all that.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's some deep stuff going on in the Vatican. The Vatican Secret Library, boy, I would love to browse in there.
Oh, I'm sure there's a lot of secrets
Yeah.
that they would want to keep. It's kind of interesting. I think it was 2008 where Pope Francis said, they're saying, "Oh, the extraterrestrials are our brother. We have to." They're basically bringing it in. Because they know it's eventually going to happen. I've heard from some sources that recently we had Donald Trump Jr. talking to his dad about the Roswell incident, and talking about the alien presence, and President Trump was saying, well, I can't speak to that, right? But it's very interesting, he says, and you look back at his background with his uncle, John Trump, who was the one that was getting the Tesla papers of the technology. And he was also the head MIT scientist that, no doubt, back, according to documents, when the Roswell situation happened, they brought in the heads of MIT scientists along with them. So undoubtedly, his background in electrostatics and his whole science background would have been one of the scientists that was brought in there. So you have to wonder how much he shared with his little nephew.
Sure. It doesn't show now, but but there's a whole that's a Trump that brings in a whole nother thing with the QAnon and all of this stuff. I'm not even sure, that might even be something to save for a different episode, because that kind of would take all of this in a completely different direction. But
I'm so happy you brought that up, because there's a very important point about that I forgot. When Eisenhower lost control to the infiltrated corporations that were basically the Fourth Reich of the Nazis, several things happened. The original MJ-12 group that was set up by set up by Truman, was completely replaced with a new executive order, putting as MJ1, of all people, Alan Dulles, and the rest of the group that was on board with that agenda. And he had basically completely lost control. And the story about him, threatening to invade Area 51 unless he got some information and everything like that. One thing he did that a lot of people aren't aware of, that I've learned through some of the secret space program witnesses that are in the Marines, that a secret executive order was set up by Eisenhower that set up a U.S. Marine Corps intelligence unit that their sole purpose was to act as an institutional safeguard if it ever got to the point where our constitutional republic was threatened. It's my speculation that 9/11 was one of those events that kind of crossed the line, and that what happened was, and with Obama and all of the nefarious, National Defense Authorization Act that he created, actually allowing the use of propaganda and disinformation against the American people, even though the FCC guidelines, I used to be a broadcast engineer, there are certain, you can't have distorted information, but all the media is, distorted. So what he did was he set this group up to become active in the future. And in October of 2017, I believe it was, the first Q post came out. And what what I believe that is military intelligence coming in, and they needed to get someone other than the Bilderberg chosen presidential candidate into the commander-in-chief position in order to, as they say, drain the swamp and get all the, what they do is this dark cabal gets all their people in the head positions of, FBI, the AMA, the CDC, the EPA, all the different organizations that we have in our government, so that, it's like a pyramidal structure. Everybody takes orders from the top down. And so unless you have that king position of the commander in chief, you're never ever going to change this. When after I saw what happened when we tried to do disclosure in 2001, naively, I was writing to the different media outlets. I even set up an online fax that I was able to get the embassies from around the world and all the representatives and Congress people into. I had like 30,000 faxes went through it for the Disclosure Project. And what I found was, I told people, I was like the webmaster for the disclosureproject.org website. I told, send me your responses from the senators and Congress people. I want to see how they're responding to this. And what it became clear after I received about 50 or 60 of these responses was that all of them are out of the loop. Not a surprise when you think, presidents, CIA directors are out of the loop. But they've all been indoctrinated how to respond to this with official denials from, Project Blue Book and NASA and so forth. And so basically our government is out of the loop. You can't get anything on Capitol Hill done. You can't get anything done by addressing the media. The media is all controlled. And so I was feeling very depressed. And I was thinking, this situation, they got complete control of it. There's no way this can change. They control the media. They control the representatives. They're out of the loop, basically, which is a form of control. And so I was wondering, how could this ever happen? When I found out the QAnon, I started looking at it, and I was kind of, skeptical. What's this? It could be just somebody making up stuff. All they were doing was basically asking the public questions and getting the people to do their own digging and researching, because they know that people don't have time to research this stuff. People are too busy with their own life, just trying to survive, trying to make their daily living. They don't have time to sit down and research back through decades of documents and witnesses and all this stuff. They don't have the time. And so when they were starting to seed the public's awareness by just simply asking questions, all of a sudden the mainstream media is like, oh, it's a fringe radical conspiracy theorists. And then you have the shootings, and you have somebody post on the 8chan or whatever, this manifesto of hate. It's like, oh, this is a violent group, pro-Trump rednecks that are have this deranged fringe conspiracy theory that they think there's a dark cabal that's connected with a bunch of pedophilia network that is trafficking children and all this stuff, to discourage all the readers of the New York Times and the Washington Post and the watchers of CNN and MSNBC, and the whole gamut of them. So they're attacking it so heavily, why? When all they're doing is just asking questions.
Sure. It's interesting how it's kind of turned into a cult bordering on a religion. It seems like there are a group of people that really hang on to every syllable and take it as gospel. And I am fascinated by that. Of course, I'm the kind of person that's a little leery of diving headfirst into something that I'm not sure of the source of.
That's smart. You and me both.
Yeah. But I'm fascinated by the dynamic that these little seeds are planted or these little crumbs are dropped, and people are trying to put them together.
Things reveal themselves over time, Um, Absolutely. There's so much disinformation. In fact, they've got, as Snowden leaked, and it turned out that Snowden's not really not really our friend. He was actually compromising the NSA, which Admiral Mike Rogers, the good guys, have taken over the huge, massive ability of the NSA that knows where everybody is and knows what everybody's doing, and is recording this conversation up there on the quantum computers up in Bluffdale, Utah. Um, every every asset is being deployed right now, sending out disinformation. Like the flat Earth is one of them. It's one of those CIA things where they see how easily people can be fooled, and so what
Sure.
they do is they create association. And they say, oh, yeah, people like QAnon, flat Earth theory, and, this and that. And it's a violent fringe conspiracy theory. Don't even bother looking into it. But you're right. It disturbs me when they make things into kind of like a cultish religion. I like just hard facts. I like information. When they kind of make it into kind of like cultish, and there's a heavy Christian element and everything. I have nothing against that. I'm not a religious person. I'm more of a spiritual orientated person. But I appreciate that. But I totally agree with your perspective on that. But if you look at what they're saying to look into, and they put questions, it starts to form a picture that is somewhat undeniable.
Yeah. Yeah, there's definitely some pieces there that are very compelling. Like connections between Q posts and maybe something that Trump will do or something that Trump will refer to.
And some of it's disinformation too, because
Sure.
the other side has access to the Q post too. So ever so often they could throw a disinformation piece out there to throw them off. It's this multi chessboard game that's going on between the deep state and the white hats, you could call them.
Well, just to bring that into a in contemporary context about putting out all this disinfo just to see what people will buy and what they won't buy. Let's put that template on the COVID situation. Do you think that's the same dynamic, or do you think? I mean, there's so many different ways to take that, to look at it, to examine it. So many layers to it. Um, do you think that there are aspects of that is sort of a control psyop?
Well, you've got two sides. You have one side that's wanting disclosure and liberate mankind, release these technologies, improve the living situation on this planet for everyone, in a benevolent manner. Maybe some gray hats in there, and not all pure white.
Uh-huh.
And on the other side, you have some black hats, and you have some very, very dark black hats involved in satanic things, and so their objective on the dark side is they want to, and they've stated it many times, they want to reduce the population by 95% of the population, and they want to control. They want to turn it into a complete control surveillance state, and they know that they can't win this election unless they compromise, and they need mail-in voting. And so you're looking at all the glitches of the news reporting where they're finding out that the case numbers are actually, you know, you have one person that tests positive, and you're finding out that the tests are giving false positives, and then they associate 16 other people with that person, and they call those cases, and then they're
Exactly.
giving the hospitals like $37,000 for everybody that they put on a ventilator, which 90% of the people die, and if they list them as COVID-19, and you have all these people that are cancer, heart attacks, flu, all going proportionately down in deaths, while the COVID-19 deaths are going proportionately up.
Yes.
And then you have 5 governors that, Democratic governors, that have gone against the CDC guidelines and have forced infected patients into rest homes, which is so criminal.
Yeah.
And so, killing people's mothers and grandmothers and that gave them a huge boost. Almost half of the deaths, reported back then were due to these rest homes. And so there is this push, and the media has been caught fabricating, scenes and situations to make it look like, and every time you look at the evening news, it's skyrocketing, it's growing, and the hospitals are overflowing, and it's the worst ever, and and all this stuff. And they look at the numbers, and you look at the projected number that Dr. Fauci has done, they in the hundreds of thousands of, and all this, all these glitches in these number projections. And then you have, what was it, Event 201, where they were projecting this virus to go across the world just a few months before the actual thing got released. And you have, you have in this meeting, they're talking about, well, one of the most important things is to have control of the social media so we don't have disinformation going out there. And sure enough, you have Google, Facebook, and everybody deleting accounts or deleting videos or anything that has anything that's contrary to the World Health Organization. The World Health Organization had prior knowledge that did not alert the United States, and they were actually encouraging to keep everything open, whereas Trump shut it down. And they were actually kind of like the Chinese Communist Party are on board with this dark agenda. They're that human rights abuse that the Chinese do is horrific, and they're kind of on board with this whole thing. So that's why Trump has distanced himself from the World Health Organization. In fact, the whole connections with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the United Nations, all these different, the CDC, which I find it interesting that the White House is going to have the reports of the cases going to our government rather than through the CDC, because they can see if these numbers are being manipulated, which they are. And so the whole thing for this fear factor that's being propagated every evening on the news is for a continual lockdown, everybody with the masks on. And here in Oregon, you have to wear the masks outside. And that would justify mail-in voting. And that's the only way they can take over control of the commander-in-chief position, so they can move forward on their agenda. And their agenda, which the mainstream media is continually supporting, that's why they're continually putting our president in a negative frame in everything he does, everything he says, is because that's their only hope. Because if they have a lot of cards, I think they're pulling out they're pulling out all assets right now, because they know it's going to be, as they say it's going to be curtains for them.
Curtains.
It's going to be curtains for you.
It's interesting how this op seems to be designed, particularly as I mentioned when we talked before I press record, for a left-leaning media. So everything conveniently that Trump says, no matter how true it may be, because it's in the context of coming out of this idiot's mouth.
He wants everybody to drink bleach.
Yes,
and all he
exactly.
said, and he just mentioned something like, maybe we should look into, something that can be taken internally, or,
Exactly.
And then they'll take anything he says and skew it and spin it and then amplify it through all their networks.
Admittedly, it's very easy to make him look dumb. It's very easy to make him look inarticulate. And I think this stuff started back when he was throwing around fake news, and that became a big thing. Oh, he's calling CNN fake news. Like, he just doesn't like people opposing his views. Like, completely disregarding the fact that CNN is fake news. Like,
Yeah,
it's
and
a
it's so
fuck.
much as leaking, like
Yeah.
ABC was protecting, Epstein, and you have
Yes.
CNN was being told, to do this and do that. And yeah, of course, and in fact, it was Brandon Stratter, what was his name? He started the walk away movement, and he was a gay, liberal, far left kind of guy, and a family member. Now, if it was a Trump supporter, he wouldn't listen to him, right? But a family member asked him, the CNN's manipulating information, and he took it on as a challenge. And then, no, I can prove you're wrong. And he looked into it and he said, oh my God. And so he flipped 180 degrees, and now he started this whole walkaway movement. So it just shows you, once a person starts to peek behind the curtain to see all the manipulations, all of a sudden the fake news media is exposed.
Absolutely. And it's not a partisan issue. That's the thing, too. That's why it's so charged.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's way beyond that. But now everything that Trump says is immediate. I mean, before he's even done saying it, they're just calling it bullshit. So,
Yeah, we're,
so
we're not Trump supporters. We're truth supporters, and
exactly.
yeah, absolutely.
And they reinforce the fact that anybody who even admits to agreeing with Trump or supporting Trump is automatically a fascist, racist, dumb, redneck, anti-intellectual. So of course nobody's going to want to even agree with anything that vaguely sounds like Trump has said, because they'll be lumped into that category conveniently too.
Look how effectively they've done it.
Yeah.
They look. He's like a Hitler, and you see all these things that, and you look at the WikiLeaks emails that Seth Rich provided to Julian. It just shows all the coordination of the media to make him look like Hitler, make it a dark agenda, and then, all this stuff, and all this got leaked. And of course, the media never looks into all that. There was a quote I saw recently by Malcolm X, of all people, but what he said was perfectly true. He says the media can make somebody who is the most corrupt individual look like a saint, and you can take somebody who is a saint and make them look like the most horrific person. I'm paraphrasing.
Yeah,
You
sure.
know, through the media, you can, with camera angles. I mean, there's billions of dollars going into engineering the perceptions of the public that the teleprompter is providing. When I was an ABC newsman, I had no idea. I was ripping off the news reports of United Press International and American Press, and I had no idea who is writing the text
Yeah,
on these things.
exactly.
And you find out at the highest level, it's it's all the intelligence agencies.
People don't realize how scripted everything is. I mean, that's the nature of TV in and of itself, but that applies to the news too. Somebody has to edit that stuff. They can't tell all of the stories. They can't tell every single aspect of the stories, but they can sure tell you one little sliver of it. And that sliver is all important.
Well, the $64 million question, since we have so much division going on, and they're so effective at creating division between race, between
Gender.
religion, sex, political affiliation. You know how and it's very touchy subjects, because a lot of people have been conditioned, to believe a certain way because of associations, watching the news over and over with these echo chamber. When you go to different sources, and it's the same information being echoed again and again and again, and you tell, like Joseph Goebbels, the head of Nazi propaganda, if you repeat a lie often and enough, that it becomes true, in the people's minds. How for the masses you know, for the masses that have, like I, back in 2001, I thought, oh my God, I used to watch Walter Cronkite with my father and everything. I had no idea, he was a Freemason. There was how 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 completely infiltrated and controlled it is, and how can we reach the other part of our population segment that has bought it hook, line, and sinker, to realize that. Well, I think what's happening is, and Q kind of posted this out. He said you can't tell people, as soon as you tell, oh, you're crazy Trump supporter, you're
Yes.
whatever, QAnon fringe conspiracy theorists, what he says, you can't tell people, you have to show them. And I think what's happening, the Wayfarer incident, with child sex trafficking, Maxwell coming out, Epstein situation, where, Epstein didn't kill himself. All these things are starting to come out. And one radio talk show I did with a detective friend of mine who actually goes out and rescues children taken in some of these situations, talking to MK Ultra mind control survivors that were involved with, some of the satanic ritual abuse, the child sex trafficking that's going on. You have to wonder how much of that is going on secretly in some of these underground facilities, deep underground facilities. So these operations are going on. I think that the public is slowly, incrementally, they're starting to see glitches in the mainstream media's perception matrix, that people are seeing there's something not quite right, and they're seeing doctors, for like as far as the virus goes, there's doctors coming out where they're, totally demonizing, oh, it's this deadly hydroxychloroquine that the president of all people, who's nothing more than a reality show host, is going up against somebody who's like Dr. Fauci, who's like an
god
expert. Yeah. All of a sudden CNN had actually turn around and they posted that, oh, well, hydroxychloroquine is actually helping people.
Yeah.
France, thousands of doctors are all, they don't have to be on these ventilators. The ventilators kill people.
Yes.
There is, what's the word? There's not necessarily cure, but there's that lessen it, like within 24 48 hours the person's better. There's doctors coming out, and so people, but this is only happening on YouTube because they have such censorship on the social media outlets, extreme censorship, and they have such a perception that's completely reversed on the mainstream media outlets that a lot of people still think, Trump wants people to drink bleach and that hydroxychloroquine is dangerous.
Yes. I found it very interesting when I think it was around the time of the fake news stuff, that when Trump was talking about that all the time, then Facebook instituted a check. They would fact check for you.
Fact check.
Yeah.
Right.
Which is like, you're just pointing out, like, you being suspect of this information gives it more power to me, actually. It's like, when I was a kid and there would be a parental discretion sticker on an album, I wanted that album more than the one that didn't have that sticker on there, because there's probably more truth there that they're trying to keep away from me. So, yeah, it's just interesting how that, and people, they don't even question that. They see that and go, oh, well, yeah, it's probably bullshit.
Well,
and then move on.
The current pandemic situation, it was a witness that way back in 2005 was involved in the city of London, that was in a meeting of high-level Freemasons where they were planning on having a pandemic out of China in the future as one of their situations. And I've been researching Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, looking at their patents, which they're working on these nanobots that could be in the vaccine that's working with DARPA, and that in these patents they have where the implant can actually read brain waves and body functions, and that according to one physicist that worked on the CERN over there in Switzerland, said that this could be connected with the 5G, and where it could not only receive information, but you could send a signal down and say if somebody is a dissident that's not going along with the program, you could terminate people if they're not going along with it. They also have a cryptocurrency thing where you can't buy anything unless you have a particular cryptocurrency. They found out that the 5G signal is exactly the 60 gigahertz signal is exactly of the oxygen hemoglobin molecule that inhibits oxygen absorption into your body to give you covert type symptoms. And Elon Musk is planning on blanketing our planet with 30,000 5G satellites. No matter where you go, you'll have the signal. And so it appears, this is a conspiracy theory, okay, that the push will be for a mandatory vaccination, which includes these nanobots, which can be used for the cryptocurrency, for tracking people, be a complete surveillance state, and also for controlling people. And could fit their, if you look at all the connections to these people to world population control organizations, eugenics, in other words, all the tie-ins, that the mass forced vaccination would be their ideal situation.
Sure. And they're scaring the shit out of people now so that they're just begging for it, which is another sort of 9/11 tactic. Like, hey, how do we get people to agree to the Patriot Act? Let's pull off 9/11.
Right. You have all these draconian laws like the Patriot Act and National Defense Authorization Act, all of these draconian laws. And when President Trump comes in, what does he do? He does executive orders completely against people doing human rights abuse and corruption and sex trafficking. If he's on the dark side, and you see all these operations, these drug cartels, like hundreds of drug cartels being taken down, sex trafficking operations being dismantled. If he's on the dark side, that doesn't make sense. It seems that human trafficking is a multi-billion-dollar business that's been going on for a long time. And, it's the executive orders that and the fact that, you have, hundreds of thousands of sealed indictments, changes the Uniform Code of Military Justice to try these people expeditiously, through military courts, and Guantanamo Bay has been expanded. There's hope that something, once they can get the people out of the top positions of the dark cabal, you could say, then and then they can move forward using the rule of law. Now, they could just come in and just take over, right?
Sure.
But no, they're using the rule of law so everybody can see it. But everybody has to see the criminality. They have to show undeniable proof. And it has to be kind of spoon-fed out, because it's too much of a psychological shock if you know what the true science fiction movie is that's actually going on in this reality of a world experience that we're having.
Yeah, it's very, very intense. It's bringing a lot of stuff to the surface. I think I find it a great. I think it's sort of ironic in a very powerful and humorous way if Trump did turn out to be the person that behind the scenes is actually doing all this really positive stuff. I'm not a Trump supporter. I'm not either party. I think politics slow human evolution personally, but
I'm a constitutional republic supporter. I believe in our constitutional republic, and you know, if if our military intelligence, which has a far greater handle on this, I'm sure, than President Trump does, I'm sure President Trump has a certain degree of knowledge in all of what's going on, of course, but they've been planning this for some time. You can imagine going all the way back to 1955 with Eisenhower, trying to figure out how to take back control of our constitutional republic from this dark cabal that is planning on in moving forward on its new world order.
well, that's one of my questions I had on my list, and I know we're kind of getting close to the end of the
I know,
run
2
here.
hours just flies. I don't know, we've done a lot
Yeah,
of stuff.
we'll have to do it again. Um, who do you think consists of the cabal? Who do you think? Do you think these are Nazis? Do you think they're Satanists? Do you think they're what?
Well, I think all of the above. I believe it's probably some of the most powerful elements are probably not even publicly known. Um, there's visible people. You have, George Soros, the Clintons, the Bushes, the Obamas, but those are all public figures. You have royal, families. You have the banking elite. You have the Vatican has their say in it too, I'm sure,
The
from according to
bloodlines.
documents. And so it's and the secret societies that some are Luciferian, uh, and the Satanists and the pedophiles, and it seems like a coordinated networks that all, although they have their own different kind of agendas, they all sort of complement each other toward moving toward a common goal because their ideologies are similar. That's my take on it as far as I can see.
Yeah, it seems very, I mean, it seems all about controlling the physical realm, which is, I find it confusing if there are Luciferian, Satanist, Sumerian, however, whatever cult these people that supposedly sacrifice children and other people, a pedophile ring, so on and so forth. It seems like the only, I mean, I can't imagine what would compel anybody to do any of those things, but the only thing I can come up with in my wild imagination is to appeal to some supernatural force, to some deity, some god, some entity, which would express a belief in something beyond the physical. So if those two beliefs don't really work together to me, like what if you believe in something higher than the physical, why are you spending so much time and energy trying to control physical things? Does that make any sense?
Yeah, absolutely. When you bring that up, was that whistleblower that talked about that city in London that was planning on doing the pandemic out of China in the future. Basically, it was connected with the Vatican, and the Vatican is connected with an extraterrestrial influence, just like the Nazis had an alliance with this extraterrestrial influence. And you have to look at all the symbolism, with the Vatican, so yes, absolutely. There appears to be a malevolent extraterrestrial, but at the same time, we have assistance from beings that the Nordics have been working with the Navy, that their technology far surpasses them. Thank God, So, but there's this kind of like in the Star Trek, this prime directive where you we've got to solve our own problems. We can't have people come in and from other planets.
Yeah.
But wouldn't it be fantastic in order to be able to have a cultural exchange with civilizations that have done their trial and error of thousands of years and have understood the only reason speaking of the occult, which they Rockefellers took out all those associations of occult with the Nazis, um, in the education process. But in also all the major universities back in 1957, they took out about the powers of human consciousness from all the psychology books. It was like a huge effort. It was written by Professor Isaac, University of London, I believe it was. And so they don't want us, we have a collective mind.
Yes.
That we each have a creative power that when we that's the only reason I do these shows once in a while, Chris, is that because of the people listening, they become aware of this reality. They may choose to research it on their own and validate it, whether it's real or just BS. And what happens is the more minds, it's kind of like they've done experiments where they found out the square root of 1% affects the masses of the millions and billions of people. And so it doesn't take a whole lot to reach a collective mass awakening, just as more people, through alternative media sources such as yours, get this information and start to question and look into it and see if there's any truth to it for themselves.
Yeah, I think as you were talking earlier about sort of keeping our technology at a certain place to keep us from evolving in that realm any further, I think there's also a psychological, spiritual limiting to where that's happening, and it's seen with the rise of materialist science, materialist reductionism, atheism, all these things that tell us that we're just random molecules in a meaningless universe, and once you die, you're worm food, and that's all there is to it. So grab all all the toys you can while you're alive, and because this is the only time you have, and this is all there is. What you can see, feel, smell, and touch, that's it. So
when we come around full circle, back to your question, is why are they keeping it secret? And the secret is because, they make multi-trillion dollars off of the gasoline, oil, nuclear, type of thing. But it's not about the money. It's about the control. Imagine if we understood the 0-point energy, everybody, third world countries would be brought up. You would have we had understanding about the extraterrestrial reality, which the Vatican wanted to have containment all the way back in 1952. And so what they're wanting to do is they wanted to have a controlled, limited hangout coming out so they can control it. That's what's probably going to come out of the New York Times next, is they're probably going to bring out about Roswell or something. And what will happen is there will be a spin in such a way that it'll seed the population, but it will move in a limited hangout and not reveal that we've had the technologies, that we were infiltrated, and that we have, our government's been, our legal constitutional government's been denied access to all this time. It will be a limited hangout type of situation where they'll be able to drag this on for a couple of more decades and not reveal the full empowering truth that could liberate this planet. And that's what I'm expecting to probably see come out, because it seems like it's coming up to a head right now where disclosure is going to be coming out from both sides, the sides that want to control it and limit it hangout, and the other side that want to liberate our planet and tell the full truth, and nothing but the truth, to the American public and the world.
I think what it all always goes back to for me is, sure, I mean, having disclosure, having these people admit that they're a part of all of this stuff and bringing all that out into the open is very, very important. But also realizing what we all personally have on our metaphorical menu, which is that reality is very collaborative. We have a big say in what happens by the kind of people that we are, by our actions, by our words, and that a lot of importance should be placed on that. Being a good person and practicing, being a good, I don't know, like in the metaphor of Indra's net, where everybody is an emerald and we're all reflecting each other. Like, to be a good reflection for people to look into and to reflect out to other people. And then everything else, I think, will fall into place or catch up if we've done our own homework.
Yeah, such an important point, to finish this off with, is that each of us are affecting the outcome of this future timeline that we're all experiencing. Don't ever think that, your desire, your wish in your heart cannot be manifest into the world, that you have your thoughts and things do affect reality. We're all a fractal of one larger mind, and as in everything with holograms, if you affect one part of the fractal, you affect all of the fractals. So each of one of us is affecting all of us.
Absolutely. That's so important. Because it's easy to get lost in the anonymity of the masses and think that, especially
you're powerless.
If yeah, exactly. Especially if you sit around and watch TV all the time. Like, if that's your window to the world and quote unquote reality, then that's dismal. That's very unidimensional, and it's demeaning to your spirit. So it's good to disconnect from that stuff, or at least gain some perspective, so you realize that we're all important. All of us are important. So thank you for putting that out there. And then there's a part of your website that you have labeled Imagine This, that is sort of an exercise in that positive future, right?
Oh, thank you for bringing that up, Chris. Yes, I thought that would be a good exercise to imagine what the future would be like, and how the internet in the future, people were able to start to see the glitches in the reality, and the children in the future, that were looking back at the challenges that this planet has faced. We're grateful for those that ushered in this new reality in this world. And it's like a positive visualization, which I, believe has the full potential of manifesting. But yes, the very act of imagining, of thinking of what we're talking about on this show, has a creative power. Absolutely.
Yeah. Amen. Speaking of which, a lot of this stuff that we've been talking about is mentioned in your website. So maybe if you could tell people where they can go and find your stuff on the internet, or how they can get a hold of you.
Sure. My website's not a professional site. It's just my own. It started out with the media company wanting me to write articles, so I put it online, and it's just my online notes, which I share freely with everybody. I never do anything associated with financial interest with any of this stuff. It's at www.thewebmatrix.net. And I keep adding to the timeline. I keep thinking I'm done, but moves on forward.
Yeah. Well, I'll put the link in the episode notes for sure. And I don't think I even got to half of my questions. So perhaps sometime in the near future we can
Would love
do this
to do
again.
another show with you,
Cool.
Chris. Really, really enjoyed the conversation with you.
Likewise. I'm honored that you accepted my invitation to be on the show, although I don't think you got my message until a couple of years later. I don't know how that happened, but I'm glad that it culminated in our conversation for sure.
I am as well.
Great. Well, Dan, thank you so much for being on the melt, and I look forward to the next conversation, which hopefully will not be too far off.
I look forward. All right, Chris.
All right.
Keep seeking truth.
Likewise, my friend. Have a good rest of your evening.
You too. All right. Bye-bye.
See you, Dan. Very engaging conversation with Dan Willis. Thank you so much for agreeing to take a couple of hours out of your time and have that conversation with me, Dan. I was highly enlightening and fun too. That's a great combination, and informative for sure. So hopefully some of you out there were able to get something new from that conversation, maybe an aspect of something that you hadn't heard before or had forgotten and got reminded of. Hopefully you were able to get something positive from that. I certainly did. You can always go to my website, www.themeltpodcast.com, for all of my past episodes. And if you want to contribute, there are many ways to do that. The most tangible way, at least in this 3D reality where we think that money is real, is to go to www.patreon.com/themeltpodcast, and you can find out where you can sign up for varying levels, but it can be as little as $1 per month. And that would help to kind of keep the wheels rolling here at The Melt, and also to help things expand a little bit, because I want to make this an even better podcast. I want to include more. I want it to be more multidimensional. I want to go out and interact with those that I want to talk with and have conversations with, and go out and document experiences too. So yes, that is how you can do that. Other ways that you can contribute are just to pass the word around. Just share this wherever you tend to hang out on the web at. Does that make any sense? Hang out on the web at. Yeah, I guess that's the right way to put that. Whether that be, Facebook, Instagram, blah, blah, blah. Feel free to share links there, either to the podcast or to a particular episode that stuck out for you. Or go to wherever you subscribe to this podcast, whether that be iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, so on and so forth, and either leave a good review or a good rating. That also helps. Spreading the word is the most important thing. Sending good vibes is wholeheartedly encouraged and highly important also. That might be more important than any of those other things. If you did any of those other things with not joy and good intentions in your mind, it might not actually help. So it's good. Our intentions are good. They inform our actions. And they inform who we reflect out to all of those around us. And all of that around us that we cannot see, or maybe most of us can't see. All of that's very important. Again, thank you all so very much for listening. You can find The Melt on many different platforms, but Facebook is now not one of them. I decided to delete my Facebook account. I'm very, very glad that I did. I didn't see a whole lot of constructive stuff going on there. So I chose to bail ship the SS Facebook. SS stands for shit show, of course. So, yes, I'm out of there. Still on Instagram, still on Twitter. I don't know about Reddit. I've not navigated the Reddit world very much. I'm not even sure if you can have a page there or it's just about topics. Somebody fill me in, please. If you have stories of your own experiences, firsthand experiences with the sorts of things that we talk about here on The Melt, you can send those to themeltpodcast@gmail.com. And it doesn't have to be anything fancy. You can just do it on your phone. And if you've listened to a good deal of the past episodes, you know that sometimes I use them in episodes where the topic of someone's story has to do with the topic of the episode, or one of the topics of the episodes. So I'm always accepting those. And I believe that's all the information that I have to give you right now. Once again, very important. Thank you very much. Very grateful that there is someone out there listening, and hopefully you get something good out of it. And if so, pass it around. It's good to pass good things around. All right. Until next time, enjoy your life. Please. It's really up to you. There are circumstances that we may find ourselves in. Usually we got ourselves there often. But we may find ourselves in a circumstance that isn't ideal. But that's a collaborative experience. It's how you perceive that particular situation that really informs what you get from that situation. So make the best of it, and you'll find that others will follow, or the mood of whatever situation that is difficult will change. You can do that. That's actually what magic is. Using your will to affect change in the world, or at least to influence, add yourself to the mix of the world. Until next time, take care.